to Zobrio University's webinar on reporting annual vendor payments. Today we have Nora Alamari here at Zobrio to lead the webinar. If you have any questions, please leave them in the chat at the bottom of the screen, and we'll go over all questions at the end. I'll now hand it over to Nora.
All right, thank you, Colleen. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nora Alamari. I am a financial edge consultant here at Zobrio. We are going to be covering the annual vendor payments for financial edge users. It's that time of year again, believe it or not, and we want to work with you to prepare for the super busy January season where you have a whole bunch of things that are due at the end of the month. So hopefully this will be a good first step for you in case you haven't thought about preparing yet. My email address is on the screen. Please write it down. Email me any questions you might have, anything regarding the 1099s or anything financial edge. And I know that everyone is here, so let's start. So the focus here is financial edge, and of course, anybody that needs to file 1099s with the IRS. Just to let you know, the focus here is on the miscellaneous 1099s. If you have the interest, the INTs, or I can't remember, there are a couple that I have worked with in the past. If you have any other form that is a 1099 form, let me know. We have worked with all kinds of forms. We can always work with you on it, but the focus here is for you to prepare for the 1099 miscellaneous. And those are the most popular, I have to say, and the software lets you prepare your vendor records to file those. So that's what we're going to be focusing on. Before we talk about the reports, I just wanted to mention a couple of things that right now it is the perfect time. It is slow, and January is a couple of months away, so you want to prepare your data in the system. You want to make sure that the vendors are, the 1099 vendors are marked as 1099 vendors, that you have marked all the boxes that need to be marked in order to produce a 1099 form for that vendor. The address, it is not enough to have an address for the vendor. It needs to be marked. There's a checkbox to indicate that this is going to be the 1099 address. So that's another thing to look at. The tax IDs, those need to be there. You need to collect all the information using the W-9, I believe. Other than the invoice, the vendor itself, the invoice also has to be marked as a 1099 invoice. And you need to indicate what box the amount should be added to and what state. So all this is just preparing for the season. This is the perfect time. You have the time, you have the tools, you have us to help you, to work with you on it. And just to let you know right off the bat that whatever the vendor provides on the W-9 should match how they have their tax ID with the IRS, and all together everything should match. Otherwise, when you file a different name or a name that doesn't match with the IRS, it's going to get rejected, and you have to file a correction, and all of that is time and money for you. So start right now. Make sure that you have everything matching. Let your vendors know that they need to fill out the W-9 that with all the information that matches how they have their tax ID filed with the IRS, and then in turn you file the right way. So all of that should start right now. It's recommended. The other part of preparing is your software and your server. So your Financial Edge needs to be at the latest and greatest version. And you can let us know if you need help with that. The patches, although they do release one, if not a couple in December to include the tax work, you should be prepared. Just make sure that you're following what Blackbaud recommends. Right now, I believe just a couple of days ago, patch 31 was released. So if you are not at 31, so when you open Financial Edge and you click on Help, About, the version number is going to appear in a small window. The last two digits need to be 31 or at least 30. If not, you need to update. Your server, you need to prepare that. Rebooting the server, making sure that you have all the updates for your server, not Financial Edge, just the server. That is time consuming. If you do that, once every month or a couple of months. So that needs to be prepared. Reason being, when we install the patch that includes the W-2s and 1099s work for Financial Edge, you are going to be prompted to reboot the server. And if you haven't rebooted for that server updates, that's going to start too, and that will take time. So it's better to prepare right now, make sure that everything is up to date, make sure that you have rebooted the server, and everything is ready to go. Just to let you know that Atrix, which is the third-party tool that is used to produce the forms and e-file, that also needs updates, and that does need permissions, and it does. All you need to do is just open Atrix, and it's going to prompt you to do updates. So a whole bunch of updates, a whole bunch of preparing just to make things easier for you in January. The due date for the forms is January 31st, just like it has been for the last couple of years. They're due to the vendors, and they're due to be e-filed with the IRS on the 31st. So mark your calendars. January is going to be very busy. The first thing I wanted to talk about is the report. The vendor 1099 activity report is a canned report. It comes with the software. If you have accounts payable, and everyone does, you should have that report. It's the first report when you are in accounts payable. You click on reports and you select vendor reports. It's the first report. The report is going to give you what vendor is going to get a 1099 for how much. So whatever the report shows is what the 1099s will look like. So all the preparing that you do is going to show, this is like your report card, let's say, right before you produce the 1099s. I wanted to show you a screenshot of what the report includes. You want to run it for the entire year. When you run it right now, of course, you're not going to cover the entire year, but you can use the options for this calendar year. And in January, when you run it right before you produce the 1099s, you're going to use last calendar year. The options I recommend that you run the report selecting and unselecting those different options that you see, just to get an idea of what the report is looking at and what you are missing. And it might remind you that I'm missing so-and-so vendor. So-and-so, that amount is too high. I need to look into this. So definitely this report is an excellent first and last step right before you produce the actual forms. And of course, you might want to consider saving a copy right before we produce the forms, because once the forms are produced, you might want to match and make sure that you did actually print a form for each vendor. The other great tool that you can start looking at to prepare for producing the 1099 forms is is queries. Those, if you don't have them from previous years, you can set them up. We can work with you on setting these up. They're very useful. They're very easy. You can export them to Excel. You can look at the actual result of the query and double-click each line, and it opens that vendor, for example. So in the Results tab, you can double-click the vendor and open the vendor record and look at it, make corrections, make changes, and close the vendor record, and you will be back on the query to click the next one. Or you can also click the arrow on like at the top of the vendor screen, the vendor window. So all these are options and tools for you to consider and definitely use, and they are definitely very helpful. The vendor query, what we recommend is you run a vendor query that includes the vendor name, because that's how it's going to appear on the 1099 form. And again, it needs to match the W-9, which in turn needs to match how the vendor is registered with the IRS. Everything, the commas, the dots, everything, the spaces, everything, match it 100% to what the vendor tells you. The other thing is, of course, the address. If you don't have a 1099 address, the query should tell you. That way you can go and clean that up. The tax ID, of course, that is needed, and it needs to be included in the query so you can get a good feel for what the data looks like. The other thing is if it's marked as a 1099 vendor, and when it's marked, what box is the default box and what state. So all this is information that you want to start working on. You prepare it. It needs cleanup. It needs you need to make calls to gather the information from your vendors. All of that. This is a good time. This is the best time to start working on it. The other invoice is the other query is the 1099 invoices. And although it is called the 1099 invoices, when you start running the query, it's the vendor query, but you are going to use the summary group of fields, and I can show you here. So this is actually a vendor query, but you're using the summary, and you can look up all the different fields, and you want to use the total amount. So you want to, for example, run a query for any vendor that has a total of $600 or more for a specific period of time. Look at the fields that are available, look at the filter tab, change it, run it again, and make all kinds of changes. You want to make sure that your data is as ready as can be. Although we do run the forms and print them and recommend that you send them and give your vendors a couple of days to look at the queries and maybe call you and say, you know, this doesn't look right, or I shouldn't be receiving a 1099 or anything like that, because you only have 1 month. It's very tight and you might not get that luxury. So this is the perfect time to run all these reports and queries in different ways and start preparing. So that I wanted to show you how the filters are used. With this field here, the total payment amount, you get to specify the amount and the date, and make sure that you run it for payments that have not been voided. That's another field that's going to be available for you to select in the Filters tab. Again, we can work with you to run these queries, to set them up. Just let us know. And if you don't have it from last year, then we can start from scratch. If you do have it, start running those queries and make the changes just to see the difference between over 600, less than 600, maybe different dates, maybe something from December, and it needs to be looked at in case it counts for a January payment, that kind of overlap between the years. So all of this is the time. This is the time for all of this. So we've covered the preparations that are needed for the 1099 season. We have covered the report that is canned and what you need, how you need to run it with different options. The two queries, there are two vendor queries. One is actually vendor information. One is invoice information. If you have any questions, please let me know. You have my email address. You have Matthew. He is our sales rep. Contact him if you need to. If you need our help, here's his contact information. Don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn. We post our updates and our news and all kinds of news about the software and the updates. All of that, you have one spot to go and look at. This webinar that covers the 1099 reporting is going to be available on Zobrio's website, zobrio.com, and you should be receiving an email with the link in a couple of days, and you will have a recording of this. So if you have any questions, all right. I hope this was useful. I hope that if you have questions, let me put my email address on the screen just in case you didn't copy it down. And I believe we are done.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. As Nora said, a recording of the webinar will be made available shortly.